Now our fourth reader for the evening is author of the collection How to Die Well, which, by the way, we have copies of right here. See him after his reading, or at the end probably, to buy copies of it. As well as the Bram Stoker Award winner. Stay tuned for November's episode. The Bram Stoker Award-nominated editor of anthologies such as Candy in the Dumpster, Waiting for October, Like a Chinese Tattoo, Mighty Unclean, and When the Night Comes Down. His work has also appeared in the Chicago Tribune, Restaurants and Institutions, The Black Glove, the Encyclopedia of Actuarial Science, and Playboy Online. Please give it up, and I do mean give it up, for Bill Breedlove.
I love that you can hear my hand on,
Right. That's good.
on what?
Yeah, right. Thank you. It sucks when you can't even follow your own introduction.
Oh, he did such a great job.
I'm not that
And I'd like to thank Neil Gaiman also for letting me borrow something out of his closet to wear tonight. This is a true story, and it goes out to all the sweethearts here. It's called Mrs. Mojo. Times were tough and business was hard. You were lucky to be able to make a go of it with a regular job, let alone some type of offbeat career like fortune teller, parlor charlatan, or real-life conjurer. She lived a long, long life and knew these types of things. So she set up shop in the low-rent district of town and called herself Mrs. Mojo, catering to the lovelorn and those who were looking for penny miracles on a similar budget. As Mrs. Mojo, she'd been able to carve out a fairly respectable niche among the tourists, punk kids, and servicemen who frequented the bars and tattoo parlors which flanked her small storefront. The way she chose to look at it, she wasn't so different from other artists who must differentiate between their gift and their livelihood. She was a musician killing time working at a record shop, an actor waiting tables. It was all the same, magical enhancements for the modern life from a mystical den of the occult that featured, "We proudly accept Visa and MasterCard," prominently on its glass front door. She decided early on what types of areas she'd steer clear from and what she could allow herself to dabble in. Countless times she's refused great sums from cuckolded lovers zealously seeking a genital disfigurement potion or body hair growth enhancer. She drew the rules broad and therefore had little difficulty staying within the borders. Don't use magic for bad. Avoid flashy miracles. Issue a terse no comment to the media. And perhaps, most importantly, never become personally involved. Given that Mrs. Mojo's single largest segment of business came from those people who desired assistance in the amorous arts, and that field had the greatest potential for trouble of any other, who could forget the Trojan War? What a mess that turned out to be. She kept a keen eye peeled for prospective disasters. And so it was one Saturday afternoon when the bells over her door tinkled the sound of another customer. Mrs. Mojo sighed from her back rooms where she kept her small apartment, regretting not turning her sign from open to closed. She'd been brewing some tea and was looking forward to putting her feet up and reading the latest issue of Weekly World News. It had already been quite a busy day. Drawing her breast purple shawl around her shoulders, Mrs. Mojo set her face in a stern expression. She had absolutely no intention of conducting any more business this afternoon. If it was really important, and they always seemed to think so, especially in matters of the heart, whoever was waiting in her parlor could come back. Standing, looking at her impressive collection of 15th century tarot card art, was a young, forlorn-looking man with a severely slumped posture. When he heard her tread on the floor, he turned to her with an almost guilty expression on his face. "Hello," he said, raising his gaze from the floor momentarily to glance at her before returning it to the tips of his shoes. Now, many people have a built-in receptor that tells them facts about another individual upon a first meeting. Some call this receptor instinct. Usually it simply reinforces another initial impression, friendly, unpleasant, dangerous, and so forth. Mrs. Mojo's receptor was a little more fine-tuned than most, so she pulled up short in her ready-made come-back-later speech. Waves of simple decency rolled off this young man with the shy gaze and the terrible posture. It had been a long time indeed since she felt such a strong sense of honest human goodness emanating from anyone. Her first impulse was to give this young man whatever he desired, and maybe free of charge to boot. "Hello yourself. What can I do for you?" The young man began to shuffle. I need some help," he stammered. Yes, of course you do," she gently admonished. "Everyone who comes to see me does. I'm in the service industry, you know." The young man looked up sharply, and the good humor in her old eyes let him know the joke was not a barb at him, but rather designed to ease his uncomfortableness. He smiled back at her. Here, she directed, steering him toward her reception table. "Have a seat. I've just been brewing up some tea. We can have a cup and you can tell me all about your troubles." A little while later, they were sitting across from each other at the table with its gaudy cloth of stars and moons and ringed planets. She personally hated the damn thing, but had to admit it was great for business. "My name is Alan Henschel, and I'm afraid I've fallen hopelessly in love." Ah, familiar ground. But you suppose that was one of the perks of this gig. You got to hear plenty of interesting stories. "Tell me all about it from the beginning," she said. "Remember, the more you tell me, the better I can help you in this matter." Alan Henschel looked calmly at her for a few moments and then began. "I came to the city several years ago. It was exceedingly hard for me to get a job. As you probably noticed, I'm quite shy and I have a really terrible posture. These two attributes tend to negatively impact my performance in job interviews. Luckily, I happened to find employment at a local public television station on the Sesame Street spin-off show, Life's Lessons." Mrs. Mojo's eyebrows rose considerably. Life's Lessons was a shockingly odious show reportedly created by the misanthropic and disgruntled former vice president of the highly venerable Sesame Street. Supposedly, this show was designed to teach children about the harsh realities of growing up. Or, as the creator, Mr. Hadley, was fond of saying, stuff that animated flashcard and dancing letters don't cover. Formerly verboten subject matters such as drugs, incest, and child abductions were featured regularly. Sure enough, while the public outcry was strident, the show was a wildly successful hit with ratings approaching record-breaking numbers. Even though the point had been made in several articles that the audience seemed to be comprised largely of bored college students and institutionalized sociopaths, did not represent popularity. Mrs. Mojo was doubly shocked. First, how on earth could this young man, given his shrinking violet demeanor and slumped posture, be on television? And second, how could such a seemingly nice individual work for such a cesspool of a television show? Perhaps her receptor had malfunctioned. "What do you do for this show?" she asked. Alan Henschel smiled ruefully. "I see you're familiar with Life's Lessons. As you probably guessed by now, then, I play the baby Snuffleupagus." Of course. Mrs. Mojo could have slapped her forehead. In the bitter contractual wars that followed the departure of Mr. Hadley from Sesame Street, there was a ferocious battle for rights to certain characters. Obviously, the judge handling the disposition of the case, who as a young girl had grown up following the antics of Bert, Ernie, Grover, Big Bird, Oscar the Grouch, and the original Snuffleupagus, would never allow any of her childhood favorites to be removed from the original show. Thus, the only character the departing misanthropic vice president was allowed to take was the baby Snuffleupagus, whom the rumor mill had it gave the judge the creeps anyway. Seeing the baby Snuffleupagus standing among an unknown cast of second-rate puppets on the set of his new show must have been a bitter pill for Mr. Hadley to swallow. Indeed, the main function the baby Snuffleupagus served on Life's Lessons was an illustration of what happened when you ventured down the wrong path or didn't follow directions. For example, during the heroin episode, Baby Snuffleupagus was required to overdose on smack and snort vomit out of his delicate pink trunk while paramedics worked frantically to revive him through electronic paddles zapping his heart. Similarly, there was the now infamous gang show, where the poor little elephant-type creature was inducted into the gang through a ritualized beating, then was subsequently spray-painted with the gang logo on his furry sides. His eventual incarceration at a juvenile detention facility included a rather graphic, even for Life's Lessons, scene where it was strongly suggested that a rough group of rival gangbangers had their filthy way with baby Snuffleupagus. That particular episode drew many outraged calls and letters. yet went on to win 3 Emmys for its gritty portrayal of both Candy and personality. In short, Baby Snuffleupagus was the show's proverbial whipping boy, being constantly humiliated, beaten, and subjected to degradation after degradation. Mrs. Mojo thought of the episode entitled Dangers of the Construction Site and shuddered. Actually, it's not that bad, the young man said, seeming to read her mind. With my particular posture, I'm unnatural for the strange contortions of the suit. And while I'm in character, I feel more uninhibited than I've ever felt in my whole life. In fact, that's probably the root of the problem. I've fallen in love with a woman on set. Mrs. Mojo nodded. No matter what the secondary sordid details, they always got to this, the part about love. Her name is Veronica. She is, appropriately enough, the person responsible for the care and upkeep of Baby Snuffleupagus. The costume, I mean, he added hastily. Lately, I've been watching her go about her job, and I can't stop thinking about her. I remember watching her carefully brush the snarls out of my singed fur when Baby Snuffleupagus was playing with matches and gasoline. It was really touching. She has such a gentle soul. Then there was the time Baby Snuffleupagus didn't listen to the lecture about horseplay in the fine crystal warehouse. She spent hours with the tweezers picking glass out of my coat and tender paw pads. I was looking at her with naked affection in my eyes, but of course all she saw was the goofy grin of the Baby Snuffleupagus. Outside of the costume, I'm so intimidated I can't even speak to her. Alan stopped his recitation long enough to fix Mrs. Mojo with a pleading stare. You have to help me. Well, she began, but he cut her off. You don't understand. It's like that suit is my own personal hell. The way Veronica lovingly holds my trunk or scratches my furry ears hurts me so badly, because I know she would never even give the real me the time of day. Is there anything else I should know? Well, he began, but his gaze slid to his shoes again and he faltered. What is it? Come on now, let's have it. Mr. Hadley is also in love with Veronica, Alan said miserably. You mean the demented man who was the creator of that vile show? The very same. What does she think of that? She tries to ignore him, but he's always all over her, touching her. I think he takes advantage of her because she's afraid for her job. I think, too, that he knows I love Veronica. Lately, things have been a lot worse at work. Ever since Mr. Hadley found out I bought Veronica a hot chocolate from the vending machine outside my dressing room, Baby Snuffleupagus has played on the railroad tracks, mixed kitchen chemicals together in the garage, and flown his kite under high-tension wires. Alan paused and Mrs. Mojo noticed the dark circles under his eyes. I just don't know how much more I can take. Next week is sweeps week. And there's talk of Baby Snuffleupagus traveling to the former Soviet Union and ignoring all the danger keep out signs around Chernobyl. Mrs. Mojo sat back a moment to think. This case seemed to have progressed from a simple unrequited love situation to something much bigger. In corner one of a square, we have a decent young man who appears to tolerate being abused at work. Again, dangers of the construction site episode rose and bidden in her mind. For the love of another. In corner 2, we have a young woman who appears to be kind and virtuous, at least to large puppet animals. In corner 3, we have the unpleasant creator of this show who is deliberately misusing his power to hurt the young woman and shower her with unwanted attention. Of course, in the fourth corner, we now find Mrs. Mojo, with maybe the power to fix this whole mess. Finally, though, was the haunting image of the gentle and friendly Baby Snuffleupagus, tangled in the last stages of radiation sickness, with unhealthy pink skin glistening through hideous bald patches in his furry coat, and blood leaping from virtually all of his many orifices to the side of her. It was more than her concern for one person or even the prospect of giving a potential love affair a kickstart. There were countless millions of children who might be irreparably scarred by viewing such a thing. Okay, she said resolutely. I think I can help you. She asked him a few questions, gave him a few directions, and sent him on his way. After thinking for a few moments, Mrs. Mojo began to gather together the things she needed for this particular situation. If there was one thing she really despised in fictional portrayals of witches and the magical arts, it was how they always managed to work in some esoteric spell, complete with a pinch of newt's tail or a sliver of dragon's breath. As if casting spells was more akin to following a recipe than working wonders. As if any simpleton who could bake brownies by following directions in a cookbook could fashion a curse to alter human behavior or conquer the scientifically accepted rules of the natural world. When she had last completed the project, she sat back and sipped her tea, nodding her old head with approval. It was a handy thing to be a witch. She and Earl, who owned the tattoo parlor she frequently recommended to clients, owed each other a few favors, but she thought that if push came to shove, more people would want to have a real-life witch on their side than some ex-marine who could draw on it with ink on human skin. Yes, it was a handy thing to be a witch. Needless to say, for those who have seen the countless replays of the last episode of Life's Lessons, Mrs. Mojo proved herself a valuable ally indeed to poor lovesick Alan Henschel and his Imamrata Veronica. Even for her long and varied career, it was a memorable experience. Because of her years helping others in the romantic arts, she correctly guessed that the best push to a burgeoning love affair is a small one, and instead concentrated the bulk of her involvement to dealing with Mr. Hadley and his nasty show. To this day, anyone who has witnessed the majestic and furious charge of the pack of wild snuffleupaguses, snuffleupagus, who seized a very surprised-looking man in the bespoke suit and plunked him in the barrel originally meant to carry the baby snuffleupagus over Niagara Falls, in spite of numerous posted written warnings expressly forbidding such activity, can only remember it as a moment of delicious irony and spectacular television. Even though Mr. Hadley was never seen again, the blood-curdling scream and the fact that the barrel and its unfortunate occupant were never located, even though the area at the base of the falls was dredged on 4 different primetime specials presented by Simon Cowell and hosted by Ryan Seacrest, spelled certain doom for Life's Lessons. In its place, a new show debuted, one called My Happy Family, which featured a real-life couple showcasing the daily joys and tribulations of married life. Over the years, new members joined the cast as the married couple added to their household, but the main focus was always on the steady relationship between the sweet but horribly slumping husband and his radiant and patient bride. And still, the tourists, punk kids, and servicemen came to the seedy section of town to have a few drinks, maybe get a tattoo, and maybe visit Mrs. Mojo. When My Happy Family aired, however, Mrs. Mojo would turn her sign from open to closed and brew herself a large cup of tea. Even the weekly world news was forgotten at those times. It was one of her favorite shows. She liked the characters. Thank you very much.